If any Viking did something wrong, he was bound to face the consequences. The entire law system was pretty different from what is usually followed in the ancient period. Here in Nordic society, theft was considered a major crime when compared to murder. What? Yes, this is how Vikings were. What were the punishments given to those who violated the laws? The answer is dreadful. If one committed any crime, he would prefer to be directly killed and not go for any other punishment. Why so? The punishments in the Viking era were as crazy as theirs. Be it a blood eagle or the hung meat, or the fatal walk or presenting oneself in the thing, each of them was so harsh and so vulnerable that a Viking would choose death rather because eventually, even after performing any one of the punishments, he will end up dying. Were the punishments so harsh? Was all this really followed by Viking society, or is it just a mention in the sagas? Which was the most common and wild? Let's buckle up to find some crazy things about how Vikings were punished. Number 5. Blood Eagle. One of the long-debated Vikings punishments among the experts is the blood eagle. Some sources from the medieval period were written in Old Norse and Latin. Both of those sources give a clear idea of how Viking brutality seems in real life. From the historic sagas, this ritual appears to be a message tied up with honor and revenge. However, most historians believe this brutal action could feasibly serve as a torture method in the Viking Age. What is this blood eagle? Well, one of the worst practices in the Viking Age is a blood eagle. Those victims were caught in the battles, and those specific people had an eagle carved on their back. When a person who was found guilty was tortured hilariously by separating the victim's ribs from their spine, their bones and skin were pulled apart and formed a set of wings using the pulled bone and skin. Lastly, the worst thing in this practice was they removed their lungs as well from the chest cavity. This is insane. If the entire version of this torture is carried out on a victim, the possibility is maximum that a victim will die quickly because of suffocation or blood loss. Only if the procedure for blood eagle is done carefully and patiently, the chances are a person may survive for a few hours, but eventually, after some hours or maybe minutes, he will die before the full blood eagle could be completed. This shocking punishment in the Viking Age has kept awestruck all of us, and it had a prominent role in the series of the 21st century where every small thing about Vikings is covered. Well, whether this is a reality or just a vague mention in the sagas is still a question for many of them. This is because most of the historic sagas mentioning such insane brutality are vague. To just create a brutal image of Vikings, they refer to some of the legends of dubious veracity or mix up accepted history chronology. So until and unless there's no evidence for such brutal actions found by archaeologists, it's pretty unreasonable to believe in such torture. However, we cannot also ignore the fact that Vikings were complex people of the Middle Age, and at the same time, their actions clearly say how brutish, nasty, and dark they used to be. Vikings were spectacularly violent, but obviously a bit less than other groups existing in the medieval period. Number 4. The hung meat. It is from the Frankel saga Freyskua, which mentions the 3 physical acts of vengeance. But why is it named the hung meat? Well, if you have ever gone through a butcher shop, you could have noticed meat is hung upside down before it's sold to the end consumers. So something similar is practiced in this dangerous punishment as well. So the authors have metaphorically compared this crazy Viking punishment with the butchered meat. From the sagas, it was found that firstly, guilty men, their hands are tied behind their backs, and just after that, the officials found some ropes down from a peg, and further, they awfully pierced holes through the men's heels behind the tendons with the knives. Just after this, they would pull out the rope from the holes in the heels and throw that extra rope over the beam and let it hang there. Such life-threatening punishments were very common in the Viking era. However, this punishment is still reasonable as the chance of dying at the moment is comparatively less, but it's still a very harsh one. Number 3. The Fatal Walk. This fatal walk is the vicious punishment of the Viking Age. So this brutal punishment was mentioned in Jarl's saga, and it's exclaimed how Bruir, a Viking mercenary at the famous Battle of Clontarf in Ireland. Most of the time, this fatal act was only for high-profile murders, or also for those whose mistake was a crazy one. In the sags they exclaimed, the prisoner was surrounded by a few officials, and later all of their weapons were smothered with branches. The executioner would open up the prisoner's belly by slit, and later the prisoner is asked to walk to the spot of his execution with her guts spilling out. This fatal walk was a shock for the guilty because even after removing an intestine, a person can survive for a few hours, but in those couple of hours, the victim would suffer dreadfully. Most of the time, because of severe blood loss and removal of the intestine, a person would die in just a few minutes because the pain is insufferable, and after every moment passing, a victim gets weaker and weaker. Number 2. The Thing. In today's era, Vikings did not have any sophisticated and civilized image today. They were often referred to as savages and were complex people in some areas, so dealing with them was a vital task for them. However, the best part about Scandinavians was they had a well-established and strict judiciary system. So did they have a police system? Well, there was a specific police system, but yes, they had the Thing. This was a local-level system that commonly dealt with some problems related to crime, murder, harassment, or any such social issues. They were the ones who were responsible for maintaining peace in society and keeping control over the violence. One aspect which was absurd in the system was that the majority of the decisions or any crucial decisions were taken at local levels by the most powerful family. So the more powerful the family, the more power they have. Those who majorly influenced the decision of the dispute were prominently known as Althing. If a Viking cut a throat and another Viking cut a purse, a Viking who cut a purse was punished more harshly than the one who cut the throat. Crazy! The punishment was so threatening that a Viking would prefer to be killed directly rather than opting for punishment. According to the crime-free Vikings used to decide what could be the punishment. Sometimes it was hanging upside down in a tree until his death, or would directly chop off his head. Most of the time, Vikings would prefer hanging themselves. Number 1. Cow Rodeo. When we go back to the early medieval Norseman period, if a person was insulting his wife, there was a heavy legal penalty that he had to pay compulsorily. Also, they have a formal dispute resolution called holmgang. Now, what is this holmgang? So in Sweden and Denmark, it was not as easy as shedding blood and surrendering the punishment, but it was much harder than anyone can think. Why would the opponent party allow them to surrender if they can ask for a deadly punishment from the man who had insulted his wife? They had one way by which a man could get rid of the punishment, and the opponent would leave him. So the idea of cow rodeo, what is this? And is that an easy one? Well, a cow was brought to a specific area where the fight took place. Then the tail of a cow was shaved and covered with grease. And on the other hand, man's shoes were also heavily greased. The cow was flogged and prodded to make it turn into its beast mode. Next task was for a man. Now he has to pass the test to get rid of the punishment. The real rodeo began when the man pulled the cow's tail, setting it off, charging around and thrashing about like a firework. Not only that man had to hold on to the cow's tail for a specific period, and if he managed to do so, he would win the test and be allowed to live. And the brownie point was the man was given a cow as a bonus, so punishment turns into a lucky guy. So these were some of the insane punishments in the Viking era. So what are your thoughts on Vikings and their vulnerable punishments? Which do you think was the worst of all? Do let us know your views in the comments below. That said, if you enjoyed watching some of the weird things about Vikings, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more such exciting content. See you in the following video.